Good day. I'm Lezlie Harrison, host of Come Sunday. Today, I am joined by vocalist, composer, and writer known as Somi. Her musical identity traversing the cultural bridge between Africa and America. She is here today to talk about her new album, Zenzele, the reimagination of Miriam Makeba, a deeply personal tribute to the legendary, groundbreaking South African singer, songwriter, actress, and civil rights activist who turned 31 years of exile imposed on her by the apartheid regime in her native country into a career of global triumph and influence. It is also a companion project to an original musical also about Miriam Makeba that Somi wrote called Dreaming Zenzele. Somi, welcome to WBGO.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
So good to see you. Let's give a little background about you. You were born in Illinois to parents who immigrated from Rwanda and Uganda. So your musical signature channels jazz, soul, and the music of your roots. As an East African Midwestern girl, what or who were your musical influences growing up in the Midwest?
Wow, I would say my influences, I'd say my first influence, I always sort of have to shout out my mother, who is not a professional singer, but she is a beautiful keeper of song. She taught me so much about Western Ugandan folk music. And she just loved popular music and listened to everything from opera to Elvis, and
Right.
And my father also loved roots music, if you will, and like Bob Marley and all kinds of other traditional musics as well. So they were probably my earliest influences. I also started studying the cello at the time I was 8, and I was kind of a classical music nerd as a younger person, as a child. But I would also say Miriam Makeba, as you mentioned, was an influence because she's sort of this ubiquitous voice that one hears. I think especially my generation of, growing up with parents who knew who she was the pop star of their generation, right? And so, I don't really remember the first time I heard Miriam Makeba's voice, but it's like she's like an old friend, an old family member, an auntie, for a while. So in many ways, I would say I took that influence for granted. Perhaps we all do when we grew up around particular musics. Until much later when I realized the sort of space-making effort that she did as the first African artist to show up on the global cultural stage, and just how she's had this ability to meld all kinds of genres, like by still staying true to herself as an African woman, but still being able to bring in popular music forms and jazz and so many other things. I would also say Hugh Masekela is a huge influence. He was my greatest mentor. I would also say Sade Adu, who in many ways was the first sort of transnational African girl who I heard. And I just loved her songwriting and her voice and the mood, her ability to evoke place and sensibility with one note, and deep visceral emotions as well, right? Like I'm thinking about Love Deluxe, I'm thinking about, Strong Pride, all of those.
Right.
So I would say a wide range. Tracy Chapman, there's so many, I don't know.
and what about traditional jazz vocalists like Sarah?
I would say
Nina
Sarah
for sure.
Yes, I mean, so the reason when you talk about my younger time as a Midwestern girl, that's why I refer to those other influences before I refer to any jazz vocalists. And I would say that because I didn't really grow up around jazz, really. I think the first time I heard, I really connected to, I grew up around a lot of musical theater, but I didn't really, I remember the first time hearing Ella Fitzgerald's Moonlight in Vermont. I was in my car my sophomore year in college, and I had to pull over because I was like, what is that?
Stop you in your tracks, literally, right?
Stop me in my tracks. And I think that just comes from like growing up in an African household. As much as my family listened to all kinds of music, my parents didn't really listen to a lot of jazz. And so I was like, what is that? And then understanding the relationship between the American Songbook and musical theater that I grew up loving and watching and really appreciating, the songs, the performances, the voices, and always sort of feeling like I had this old voice, that I didn't really sit in like what might be considered popular
Mhm.
ways of singing, or at least the singing I was drawn to, right? I like the old voices. And so, as in earlier eras, and so it was in I would say in my 20s when I really started taking the, my voice more seriously, when when I decided to take the path of a singer, the journey.
Mm.
Before that, I was planning on being a medical anthropologist. So, uh,
What a flip.
what a flip, but also not. Healing through culture, I think it's
Right.
connected. But anyway, and so I think, you know, then is when I began to really do that deep dive, and Nina Simone and Sarah Vaughan, those are probably my favorite vocalists of all time, and Miriam Makeba. And that's also when I began to hear her relationship to jazz and think about
Mm.
has situated itself in that kind of conversation around global jazz, idioms. And then also, the contemporaries like Diane Reeves. I adore Diane Reeves. I'm grateful to call her a friend and mentor. Uh,
Mm.
Dee Dee Bridgewater, all of these people have had profound impact in my life, personally and professionally, and influenced me in all kinds of ways, mostly to lean into freedom, right?
Mm.
If you consider all of these voices, it's about a certain type of freedom. Um, and an unapologetic, presentation of the cultural self, unapologetically Black women, and I think, that inspires me greatly, and continues to and always does. And I think I remember a conversation I remember with Diane Reeves about, what does it mean to be a singer and what does it mean to have a voice,
Mhm.
and just being okay. Like I feel like I don't really neatly fit into jazz, right? Because
Right. But
because
that's the beautiful thing.
well, thank you. Thank you for that. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's about trusting the voice and trusting
Mhm.
what your point of view is, and hopefully people connect with that. So I'm grateful.
Well, I am connecting with your new album. I love it. And
Thank
all those classic Miriam Makeba songs like Pata Pata.
you. Thank
You also do House of the Rising Sun, and the duet you do with Gregory Porter.
you.
Also, you have guests on the album like Angelique Kidjo, also Lady Smith, Black Mambazo. How was that organizing that album, and what was the inspiration behind the whole dedication and reimagination of Miriam Makeba's work?
Sure. So the reason I've sort of taken on this interdisciplinary cultural memory project, because it's a play, it's an album, and there are other things that have kind of inspired my own research and journey, about her life and legacy. I would say it was when she passed away, I was just about to do a show at Drome on the Lower East Side.
Mm.
And I got a phone call this was in 2008, and I got a phone call from Brian Backus.
Oh, that's one of my besties. Yes.
Yeah, so Brian always shows up at sort of these serendipitous,
Hmm.
auspicious moments in my life. I
Right.
mean, he's shown up, and so I tell him this all the time. He'll call me, say something, and it will totally change the trajectory of my life. It's very interesting. Anyway, so hi Brian, if you're here. But so Brian calls me and said, "Hey, Somi, I know you have a show tonight. I thought you might want to know that Mama Miriam has passed." And I was like, and I couldn't even like I normally don't answer the phone, but because it was
Mm.
Brian,
Right.
I answered before I went on, right? And I remember having to walk out and tell the room about her passing. And I just remember like the air kind of left the room and everyone kind of was just a bit stunned. I don't really remember the rest of the night, but I know that the rest of the concert, but I know that when I got home, I just kept thinking, well, who's going to honor her? What is the thing? Where's the gathering? What's happening to honor her, right? And I emailed a number of presenters asking if I could produce a memorial concert of some sort
Mm.
and gather people. And of course, it's last minute and everybody books their season so far in advance, but Le Poisson Rouge had just opened. Bryce Rosenblum was the new booking person there, as the first booking head there, programming head there. And he wrote me back and said, "Hey, Somi, sure, you can do it here." And in 6 days, I was able to invite a range of people, whoever was in town. But those
Right.
people included Randy Weston, Paul Simon came and spoke.
Mm.
Randy came and spoke about what it was to tour with her and Dizzy Gillespie, and performed. And also Paul Simon came and did a short set and talked about what it was to perform with her at Graceland during the Graceland tour and bring her back into public consciousness in the United States, because basically after she married Stokely Carmichael, she was exiled, blacklisted for like 20 years. And so what it was to return and to bring her back into celebrity and celebration of her voice and work. Harry Belafonte came and eulogized her and spoke about what it was to have to be a part of that introduction of her voice to the larger public. And a range of African artists, came and it was just an extraordinary night. Amiri Baraka was in the room. He was in her very first show in the United States at the Village Vanguard in December 1959. So it was, people kept saying, "Somi, how did you get all these people in the room?" And I remember Art DeLucoff, who is the original owner of the Village Gate and still owns that property of Le Poisson Rouge, he came and spoke about what it was to have her and Nina Simone, who was her best friend and sister, most people don't know that, have both of them doing a double bill at the Village Gate with Bill Cosby as the big act. Her bass player, the late Bill Salter, came with a photograph of her performing live on the Village Gate stage and handed me a DVD of her performing when I passed on at the Vatican. I mean, it was extraordinary. And then there was just like an array of the younger artists, African artists, Les Nubian, Kanan, myself, different people who came and toasted her, right? And it was just wonderful to have this sort of intergenerational honoring. And it was interesting because nobody covered it. Like, it was packed. It was magic.
Right.
No one covered this event. And I just remember thinking, when everybody was like, "Somi, how did you get these people here?" And of course, there's like the more explicit, Randy and Neil Clark, who's Randy Weston's longtime percussionist. He's called Harry Belafonte. And just, there were ways that happened, but what is it to gather them? And I said, you know what, this isn't even about my relationships. This is about a large number of people, the masses, wanting to honor this woman and this voice. And I still think about it and get chills. And I think about it as one of the most important things I've done in my own career. At that point, not knowing that I would, many years later, go on this journey of honoring her through an album, through a play, all of these other ways. But I always think of that moment as sort of the beginning of a spiritual conversation with her legacy, but also, especially at that time in my career, I was like, there's an expression in Nigeria. I used to live in Nigeria. They would say, I'm a small girl, right? Like, this small girl, how am I the one calling all of these people into this space? And I just thought, this is the fact that it's me means that there's a grave and kind of deafening silence that shrouds her legacy. It doesn't make sense that my memorial became the only one that happened in New York. It didn't make sense that my memorial was the one that Baba Belafonte came to, right? But perhaps one could say it does make sense, right? Because of that lineage and connection. But at the same time, I didn't have those relationships at that time. So it was, it sort of stayed with me, and what is it to not remember? And then what is it to speak her name regularly and call her memory back into space as she deserves?
Wonderful. What a wonderful story. And thank you so much for doing that, that wonderful tribute to Mother Africa.
Thank
Now,
you.
yeah, in April, you had an off Broadway run in New York City with your original play, Dreaming in Zenzele. And in October, you won Best Jazz Vocal Performance for the Zenzele album. You are on a roll here. Tell me about the play and where is it now?
So the play, we toured nationally to 4 different regional theaters across the country, from 2021 to 2022. It was originally opening in March 2020, but of course that didn't happen when the pandemic hit. But so thankfully we were able to come back, and it was a project I had been developing, including the pandemic years, for 7 years. Um, and that takes place actually on the idea of the piece is that it takes place on the last night of her life, which, as I mentioned, well, I didn't mention, but it takes place on the last night of her life, which perhaps some people might know. She finished a concert in Italy, walked into the wings, had a heart attack, and died,
Mm,
which I think is a beautiful death, right? Because it suggests that she must have felt some kind of way, but
right.
that speaks to her generosity, the fact that she's like, I'm going to actually still be with the people who have been with me, give to the audience, and then step away. And so it goes through that. It takes place on that night, and it's about the spirits, the ancestors coming to her and talking to her about why that night was the night that she needed to go, and that she could put down the fight, and that the voice actually lives on. Um, and so that has been wonderful because I've stretched as a writer, I've stretched as a performer, a vocalist, putting her voice. I mean, this is both from the play and the album, but in the play, I'm actually playing the role of Miriam Makeba. So to really try to embody her voice and
Mm.
her physicality, it was a really wonderful and rich challenge, and also just stretch. And it's my first professional acting run, and so the future of it, because it closed a few months back, or it finished the run a few months back. The future is that we're planning for on some international productions, and my goal is to take it home to South Africa,
Oh, nice.
and some other places abroad, and then hopefully we'll bring it back to New York, the shiny kind of a bigger run. We'll see
Da
what
da 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 da.
we'll see.
Well, I look forward to seeing it, and I'm so happy that you stopped by today. You have been quite busy. You're in the middle of a world tour. I do believe you're on a little bit of a break from I looked at your schedule. And you're also busy working on your doctorate at Harvard University Department of Music. And
Yeah.
you are also a recipient of the Doris Duke Award. What is that about? Tell me a
Uh,
little bit about that and what that means to you and your career right now.
the award or school?
Well, uh, I know they're both two different things, but yeah, they're pretty major.
No, thank you. The
Sorry.
award, the Doris Duke Artist Award, is, something I've always marveled at a distance, and also I've known past recipients, and so it's been wonderful to see colleagues and friends and artists I admire but don't know personally celebrated in that way. I am deeply honored, uh, deeply humbled by it, to know that it's my peers who
Mhm.
who make the decision, or who whatever the process is of, who are a part of that process, is is really affirming, and in many ways, it gives me courage,
Well,
because
congratulations. Yeah.
I thank you. So thank you. Yeah, I think I'm a bit, uh, I'm still processing what it means, but I am so grateful, and I think more than anything, it just means more agency to do all kinds of other work, and just like hopefully strike a balance between life and art.
Well, I look forward to seeing what else is coming up and you're getting your doctorate from Harvard.
Yes, which is another journey, but
I know.
yeah.
Thank you so much for stopping by WBGO and speaking with me, and congratulations on everything that you're working on, Somi.
Thank you so much.
I've been following you for a while, and I just love your journey, and it's very inspiring, and I'm sure that it will inspire a lot of our listeners as well.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much, and you've been listening to this wonderful conversation with Somi here at WBGO Studios. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Somi.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye bye.